So as I had kind of teased the lesson this morning, it's about goodbye. And goodbyes are difficult for us. And I've been camping out, as you know, in Genesis, studying about Joseph. I think he's a fascinating individual, and I've gained a lot of insight just from my own personal study related to him. And hopefully some of the thoughts that I've been sharing with you along the way have been beneficial to you. The text from this morning's lesson is taken from Genesis chapter 45, verses 24 through 28. Then he, referring to Joseph, he sent his brothers off, and as they left, he told them, "Now take it easy on the journey. Try to get along with each other." They left Egypt and went back to their father Jacob in Canaan. When they told him, "Joseph is still alive, and he's the ruler over the whole land of Egypt," he, referring to Jacob, went numb. He couldn't believe his ears. But the more they talked, telling him everything that Joseph had told them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him back, the blood started to flow again. Their father Jacob's spirit was revived. Israel said, "I've heard enough. My son Joseph is still alive. I've got to go see him before I die." Most of you probably recognize that picture. That's John Glenn. And John Glenn knew how to fly a fighter jet. He completed 59 missions in World War II and 90 in the Korean War. He also knew how to fly fast. He was the first pilot to ever average supersonic speed on a transcontinental flight. He also knew how to fly into outer space. In 1962, he became the first American to orbit the Earth. He knew how to win elections. He was a United States Senator from 1974 to 1999. John Glenn, he did a lot. I mean, he gave a lot of speeches. He led a lot of committees. He inspired a lot of audiences. He even wrote books. But for all of John Glenn's accomplishments, there's one skill that he was never able to master. He never learned how to tell his wife goodbye. The two met when they were toddlers, and they both grew up in Ohio. And though John went on to achieve national fame, he would have been the first one to tell you that the true hero in his family was the girl that he married in 1943. But his wife, Annie, she suffered from disfluency, which is just a fancy way of saying that she couldn't speak clearly. She had a stuttering problem. And she couldn't talk on the phone. She couldn't order food in a restaurant. Just the idea of requesting help, maybe in a department store, frightened her. So she'd just kind of wander through the aisles, reluctant to speak. I mean, she actually feared the possibility of a family crisis because she didn't know if she could even make the 911 call. So that's their difficulty with goodbye. Now, at the time, John couldn't bear the thought of separating from his Annie, so the two developed a code. Each time John Glenn was deployed on a mission or called to travel, the couple bid each other farewell the same way. John would tell Annie, "I'm just going down to the corner store to get a pack of gum." And Annie would say, "Don't be long." And off John Glenn would go. Korea, Japan, outer space, but that's the way they always said goodbye. "I'm just going to go down to the corner store and get a pack of gum." "Well, don't be long." Over the years, Annie's speech actually improved with some therapy that she had received. Even so, goodbye was kind of the one word that the couple couldn't say to each other. In fact, in 1998, Senator John Glenn became the oldest astronaut in history, if you recall. He re-entered the space in the Discovery shuttle, if you recall that, and prior to liftoff, he told his wife, "Well, I'm just going down to the corner store to get you a pack of gum." This time, however, he gave her a present. He actually gave her a pack of gum. And Annie kept it in a pocket next to her heart until her husband arrived safely home. As maybe some of you will recall, John Glenn died at the age of 95. He passed away some 4 years ago in 2016. And Annie died just this past May at the age of 100 as a result of complications from COVID. They were married for 73 years. Devout Christians, wonderful couple, but still never mastered the art of saying goodbye. No one wants to say that. Not the spouse of an astronaut, not the mom of a soon-to-be preschooler, not the father of the bride, not the husband in the convalescent home, not the wife grieving at the funeral home, especially that. I mean, death is the most difficult goodbye of all. Now, some say that death is just a natural part of living, but it isn't. Birth is. Breathing is. Belly laughs are. Big hugs maybe. Bedtime kisses. That's living. But death, I mean, we weren't originally intended to say goodbye. God's original plan had no farewell, no final breath, no day or last heartbeat. But death came in as an interloper, an intruder, kind of like a stick figure in the Louvre Museum. It just doesn't fit. You know, like, why would God give me a golfing buddy and then take him? Why would God fill a crib and then empty it? No matter how you frame the question, goodbye just doesn't feel right. And Jacob and Joseph lived beneath the shadow of goodbye. When the brothers lied about Joseph's death, they gave their father, Jacob, this blood-soaked coat. And the inference was that a wild beast had dragged the body away. Jacob collapsed in sorrow. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 34, it says, "Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many, many days." Jacob probably wept until his tears turned into brine, until his soul just was shriveled within him. The two people he loved the most were gone. And yes, he should have loved all of his children. But he did have his preferences, as we know. And the two people in his life he loved the most were now gone. His beloved Rachel, whom had given him Joseph, and now Joseph. In Jacob's eyes, the two people that meant the most to him are gone. Rachel is dead, and now Joseph is dead. And it kind of seems like something inside Jacob kind of died too, because it says in Genesis chapter 37, verse 35, all of his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son." So his father wept for him. And Joseph, he lived with the same sorrow. 2 decades had passed. By the time we have this reunion, it's been almost 23 years. There have been no phone calls between Jacob and Joseph. Jacob has been led to believe that his son died over 2 decades ago. Joseph knows that he's alive, but has no idea if his dad is still alive. Remember the first contact that they had with the brothers when Joseph revealed himself? What did he say? "It is me, Joseph, and is my dad still alive?" So Joseph has been living with the same sorrow and the same goodbye as well. 2 decades had passed, no word from home, no birthdays, no holidays, no harvest days, no nothing. I mean, Jacob was never far from his thoughts. Priority number 1 for Joseph was family, and now a family reunion. You know, you've been with me now through the several weeks that we've talked about this story, from Joseph being sold into slavery until now Joseph revealing himself to his brothers, sending them home and saying, please bring Dad back and settle here in Egypt. And so Joseph wants nothing more than a family reunion, to bring that family around him from whom he has now been separated for more than 20 years. So Joseph told his brothers to saddle up, ship out, and come back now with the entire family. And he even supplies them with provisions for the journey. And then he gave them all new clothes. Well, except for Benjamin, his little bro, whom he gave 5 changes of clothes and 300 pieces of silver. See, there's still this preferences going on in the family because Benjamin and Joseph shared the same mother. But for whatever reason, Joseph had this fondness for his little brother. So he sends all of them home with a new change of clothes except for Benjamin. He gives them 5. Sends the brothers home with carts and donkeys and provisions, and sends cash with Benjamin, 300 pieces of silver. He sent his father 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 donkeys loaded with grain, and all kinds of other food to be eaten on his journey now from Canaan to Egypt. So he sent his brothers off, and as he left, he called after them, and we just read this, Genesis chapter 45, verses 21 through 25. He basically says, okay, take it easy and try and get along, if you would. So the brothers left Egypt, returned to the father, Jacob, now in the land of Canaan. Now Jacob's brothers are returning home in style. Gone were the shabby robes and the skinny donkeys. It was like they were driving brand new pickup trucks loaded with all sorts of stuff in the back of the bed. They wore leather jackets and alligator skin boots, and when their wives and kids spotted them on the horizon, they shouted, "You're back! You're back!" And hearing that, Jacob emerges from his tent. And I'm imagining it's this rush of hair, maybe long and silver, maybe it's reaching his shoulders, stooped back, face leathery, kind of like rawhide. And he squints at the sun-kissed sight of his sons and all the stuff that they have with them. And he was just about to ask where they stole it when one of them blurted out, "Joseph is still alive, and he's the ruler of the whole land of Egypt." Jacob at that point goes numb. That's what the Bible says. He goes numb. He's been thinking for the past 20 years his son is dead. Now he's being told that his son is alive. And not only is he alive, but he's second in command in Egypt. I mean, he just couldn't believe his ears. And I'm thinking he probably grabbed his chest. Do you remember the sitcom was called Sanford and Sons? Remember that? And remember Fred Sanford? He'd be told something and, he's like he was going to have a heart attack. Okay, that's kind of what I pictured Jacob. It's like, what? My son Joseph is alive? Leah brought him some water and glared at the sons as if she was saying, you better not be playing a trick or a joke on your dad. But this was no trick. Genesis 45, verse 27. The more they talked, telling him everything that Joseph had told them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him back, the blood started to flow again. Their father Jacob's spirit revived. Sadness had sapped the last drop of joy, probably out of Jacob in his life. Yet when the sons told him what Joseph had said, how he had asked specifically about Jacob, how he had called them now to Egypt, Jacob's spirit now revives within him. He looks at the prima facie evidence of the fact that the boys are telling him the truth, all these carts just loaded with all sorts of stuff. He looks at the confirming smiles of his sons, and they're nodding their heads saying, "Yes, it's true, Dad. Yes, it's true." And for the first time in more than 20 years, this old man began to believe that he would see his son again. Maybe his eyes began to sparkle and his shoulders maybe straighten up a little bit. And it says in Genesis chapter 45, verse 28, Israel said, "I've heard enough. My son Joseph, he's alive. I've got to go see him before I die." Did you catch that? The narrator of the story calls Jacob by his other name, Israel. The promise of a family reunion, church, can do that. It changes us from sad to seeking, from lonely to longing, from hermit to pilgrim, from Jacob, which meant schemer, to Israel, which means Prince of God. Genesis chapter 46, verse 1 says, "So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac." Do you know how old Jacob was at this point? He is 130 years old. He's an old man. 130 years old. So he's hardly a spring chicken. He probably had a hitch in his get-along and probably had aches in his joints, but nothing was going to keep him from seeing his son. He took his staff in his hand and he issued the command, basically, load him up, we're headed to Egypt. And the text then goes to this kind of wide-angle look of what's going on at this particular point of time, and we're given like an aerial view of the entire clan of Jacob now in migration from Canaan to Egypt. By virtue of a census that you can read there, the narrator mentions each and every family member by name. The sons, the wives, the children, no one is left out. The whole gang of 70 people make the trip. And can you imagine what that trip was like? You're going from a place that is locked in a famine, Canaan, to a place that is awash in plenty. And on the way, you're seeing pyramids and palaces and irrigated farms and silos. I mean, Jacob's clan had never seen anything like this. And then the moment that they had all been waiting for. And I don't know, again, this is just me, but I'm assuming that Joseph didn't come to see his dad alone. He is the second in command of Egypt. So I'm imagining Joseph is probably maybe in a chariot, but he's flanked with all sorts of people protecting him. And this wide flank of royalty appears on the horizon maybe. It could be chariots, horses, the imperial guard. And as this entire entourage draws near, Jacob is leaning forward to get a better glimpse of the man in the center of the chariot. And when he saw his face, Jacob whispered, "Joseph, my son." And across the distance, Joseph is leaning forward in his chariot. He told his driver to go faster. When the two groups met on this flat plain, the prince did not hesitate. He bounded out of the chariot and ran in the direction of his father. And Genesis chapter 46, verse 29 says, "The moment Joseph saw him, he threw himself on his neck and wept." This is the second time that the Bible records Joseph weeping. The first time, it was so uncontrollable, he dismissed his entire staff and told them to leave him alone because he was weeping uncontrollably because he had just now revealed himself to his brothers. And the entire 20-year experience just comes washing over him. Joseph is a man's man, but he had no problem crying. And this second time now, he is weeping on the neck of his 130-year-old dad. What a reunion. Gone were the formalities. Forgotten were the proprieties. Joseph buries his face in the crook of his father's shoulder, and verse 29 says he wept a long time. And I'm imagining as tears are moistening his robe, both men resolved that they would never, ever say goodbye to each other again. Goodbye. You know, for some, this word is like the challenge of their lives. To get through this is to get through maybe raging loneliness or strength-draining grief. You sleep alone, maybe in a double bed. You walk the hallways of a silent house. You catch yourself calling out his name or reaching for her hand. And as with Jacob, the separation has just exhausted you and your spirit. You feel quarantined. You feel isolated. The rest of the world to you has moved on, and you ache to do the same thing, but you can't. You can't say goodbye. But if you can't, then I want you to take heart. God has served notice. All farewells are on the clock. They are filtering like grains of sand through an hourglass. If heaven's throne room has like a calendar on it, then there is one day that is circled in red and highlighted in yellow. God has decreed that there will be a family reunion. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18, Paul, writing to the church, says, "The Master himself will give the command. Archangel thunder, God's trumpet blast. He'll come down from the heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise. They'll go first. Then the rest of us who are still alive at the time will be caught up with him into the clouds to meet the Master. It'll be like walking on air. And then there will be one huge family reunion with the Master. So, reassure one another with these words." This day will not be a small day. It will be the great day. The archangel is going to inaugurate it with a trumpet blast. Thousands and thousands of angels will appear in the sky. We know that from reading the book of Jude, verses 14 and 15. Cemeteries and seas are going to give up their dead. And Hebrews chapter 9, verse 28 says, "Christ will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him." His coming will be the only event ever witnessed by the entirety of humanity all at the same time. Now, it's true, not everyone will want that moment. Because in Matthew chapter 24, verse 30, it says, "Unready people all over the world will raise a huge lament as they watch the Son of Man blazing out of heaven." And just as the book of Genesis lists the family of Jacob, the book of life lists the family of God. He will call the name of every person who accepted his invitation and became his child. And he will honor the request of those who refused him and dismiss them for eternity. Then he'll bless the desire of those who accepted him and gather them to a family reunion. And that will be some kind of family reunion where Revelation chapter 21 verse 4 says, "He'll wipe every tear from their eyes." You know, it's almost as if his first action will be to rub a thumb across the cheek of every child and say, there, no more tears. This long journey will come to an end. You'll see him. And you'll see them. I mean, isn't that our hope? In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 17 and 18, there will be one huge family reunion with the Master. So reassure one another with these words. Exactly. I mean, just remember your future with your loved ones is infinitely greater than was your past with them. Let me repeat that. Your future with your loved ones is infinitely greater and longer than your past was with them. But death, just seems to take so much. We bury not just a body, but the wedding maybe that never happened, or the golden years that we never knew. We bury dreams. But in heaven, those dreams will come true. God has promised, according to Luke in the book of Acts, chapter 3, verse 21, a restoration of all things. And all things includes all things, including relationships. I'm going to mention a name that maybe some of you know of. His name is Colton Burpo. And he was only 4 years old when he survived an emergency appendectomy. His parents were obviously thrilled and overjoyed that he survived the emergency surgery. But they were stunned by this little 4-year-old's stories. Over the next few months, Colton talked about his visit to heaven. He described exactly what his parents were doing during the surgery. Colton told stories of people he had met in heaven, people he had never met on earth or had even been told about. And in the book, it's called Heaven is for Real, Colton's father relates the moment that this little 4-year-old boy told his mom, and I'm quoting, "You had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you?" The parents had never mentioned the miscarriage ever to their son. I mean, he was too young to be able to process that. So emotion now fills the mother's face. Who told you that I had a baby die in my tummy? The mother's name is Sonia. Her tone was really serious. And Colton said, "She did, Mommy. She said she died in your tummy." A bit nervously, Colton faces his mom again, this time a little bit more warily. "It's okay, Mommy. It's okay. She's okay. God adopted her." Sonia about slid off the couch and knelt down in front of Colton so that she could just look him in the eyes. "Don't you mean Jesus adopted her?" "No, Mommy. His daddy did." Sonia's eyes lit up and she asked, "What was her name? What was the little girl's name?" Colton says, "She doesn't have a name. You guys didn't name her." The parents were stunned. I mean, there was no way that Colton would have known that. But he had one more memory. And he shared it before he went out to play, like any 4-year-old would do. "Yeah, she said she just can't wait for you and Daddy to get to heaven." Now, whether you believe these kinds of stories like Colton's, that's really not the point. Colton stands by it to this day. His parents stand by it to this day, but you may choose to believe or disbelieve it. That's totally fine. But if you're a Christian, believing is seeing. Maybe your grandpa, maybe your aunt, maybe your child, maybe your mom, maybe your dad is saying the same words about you. They're looking toward that day when God's family is back together again. And shouldn't we be doing the same? In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "Since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses, let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us." High above us, there's a crowd of witnesses. There are the Abrahams, the Jacobs, the Josephs from all generations and all nations. They've completed their own race. They've completed their own events. And now they're witnessing the race of you, your spiritual race. And they might be your spiritual descendants. For all I know, it could be your physical descendants. But what we know is they're shouting, "Run! Run! You'll get through this. No goodbyes in heaven. We'll speak of the good book, but goodbye? No." Let, church, that promise change you. From sagging to seeking. From mournful to hopeful. From dwellers in the land of goodbye to a heaven of hellos. The Prince has decreed there will be a homecoming. So like Jacob or Israel, maybe we should take our staffs and start traveling in his direction. The smart one in the back of the room, Justin, said, well, are you going to give the etymology of the word goodbye and kind of tie that into the message? I said, no, that thought had not even occurred to me. And he said, well, did you know, and see, now I'm getting schooled. Did you know that the word goodbye had its origin as in God bless you? That's how goodbye started. But, pardon me? Be with. God be with you? Okay. Well, that's a mouthful. God be with you. God be with you. Vaya con Dios. I mean, that comes off the tongue pretty easily, but a lot of us are lazy. And so God be with you got truncated and truncated and truncated and truncated and truncated even further until it's just goodbye. But it had its origin in God be with you. So goodbye is not goodbye. It's may God be with you. And that's what this message is about. That God is with us. And we will be with him. And sometimes going through this life is difficult. It's not easy. Especially given a pandemic. And all the rules and all the regulations. It is just exhausting. I mean, Justin spends a good portion of his day just reading through all the new legislation that is being pumped out by Sacramento. And they keep changing kind of the goalposts in terms of how to evaluate stuff. And I'm not getting political. I'm just saying that there's a lot to be kept up to date on because we don't want to be putting this church in an unsafe place. But one day, we won't have to put up with all that nonsense. We'll just be with God and be with Jesus. And then we can truly say, God be with you. Well, I'm with God now. And it is a goodbye. It's good to be with God. So this week, as you go through your life, whether it's staying home and being isolated or being quarantined like Billy, to make sure that she stays safe so that she can then have her surgery. Or if you're back at work, or maybe you're doing this virtually, or maybe you're doing it from a distance. I mean, I've read reports where people are getting tired of living, let's say, in Manhattan, in New York, and they're tired of living in an apartment and paying, $3,000, $4,000 a month. And they're tired of being in these tight little quarters. And now, because of this pandemic, people are working remotely. These same people that are tired of living in Manhattan at $4,000 a month in a small little apartment have now bought land in Montana, and they've bought several acres where they can stretch out and work as successfully remotely in Montana as they ever could in the streets of Manhattan. These are some strange times we're living in, but it doesn't have to be a sad goodbye, because there are no goodbyes in heaven. So this week, be encouraged. Think about this reunion. Let it kind of just simmer for you, and let it be something that you truly look forward to. Because then it makes some of the stuff that we put up with seem not as significant as sometimes we make it out to be. I forgot to mention, but if you have a prayer request that you would like us to pray about, we'll do that after the closing of this song. We've got a mansion over the hilltop. That's the name of this song. And one of these days, we'll all be there. So let's stand, let's sing, and then we'll dismiss with a word of prayer.